This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
And welcome to this week's program. As you can see, we have a packed agenda. Let's turn first to the nation's capital. We're joined by Congressman Bruce Westerman. He represents the 4th District of Arkansas. Congressman, thank you for being with us. We appreciate you being here.
Hey, Roby, great to be with you today.
Let's begin with the U.S. budget, which missed an April 15th deadline to complete. Now doesn't appear to have a time frame in sight for some approval. From all press accounts, in terms of what I read, there are fractures within the Republican caucus, and then you've got the Democrats that have some different priorities as well. Are we going to get a budget anytime in the near future? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, we're still working through the process on that. We've got, we did miss the April 15th deadline. There's also a May 15th deadline that if we don't approve a budget by the 15th, then the appropriation process can start going forward. The only problem with that is there's no restrictions on the appropriation process. Now, I don't think the appropriators will write bills to a level higher than what's in the budget. We've actually passed the budget out of committee. It's just going through some scrutiny and some debate before we get it out on the floor.
What's going to move the needle on this? Where do you see the points of pressure that are going to force some compromise? Because it seems like everybody's pretty unbending right now in terms of their willingness to move.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is coming up with about $30 billion in savings out of mandatory spending, which is something I'm all for. There's been several proposals put out there on how to accomplish that, and it's just coming to an agreement on how we can implement those policy changes to get that $30 billion in mandatory savings.
Well, give me an example
if you look
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, if you look at the spending levels right now, on discretionary spending, which that's what we're talking about when we talk about this budget, we're several $100 billion less in real money than what we were in 2009. So the discretionary spending has come down. We're at a level of $1.07 trillion is what's in the budget, and there's some people that want to drop that down to $1.04 trillion. The thing about that $30 billion, all but about $2.7 billion of it is going to the military. So there's a lot of wrangling back and forth, but I think we'll work through it and come up with a budget so we can continue on with the appropriation process.
You don't think that you'll make the May 15th budget? Do you think, the deadline, do you think it'll be later than that in the year?
No, I think we'll make the May 15th, or we may not have a budget if we don't make May 15th, but I'm holding out that we'll have a vote on it when we get back in a week or two, and it'll pass, and we'll continue on. And we're talking about the budget that the Budget Committee passed, but there's also a budget that the Republican Study Committee has put out that's a much more conservative budget. And all these budgets get presented, and we can vote on multiple budgets, and it's the one that gets the most votes that actually becomes the budget.
Yeah, I bet you wish it was like that when you were working in the Arkansas House of Representatives back in the day. You had one budget to work with there.
I'm all for modifying the budget process up here. I would much rather have a budget process here that's like the one we had in Arkansas, where the budget actually controls the numbers. It's the terminology is a little bit flip-flopped in the state. When you have a line item for a budget, that's all that an agency or program can spend, and you have to have an appropriation to authorize the spending. Up here, the budget sets the maximum expenditures and the floor on revenues, and the appropriations are what actually create the line items on how much can be spent. So when you think of budget and appropriations, the federal government versus how we do it in Arkansas, it's a little bit flip-flop.
Let's move to another financial issue. You're on the Natural Resources Committee, which has its hands full with a debt situation in Puerto Rico. You've written a recent guest commentary on this, but to summarize, Puerto Rico, it's an American territory under congressional oversight, is about to default on $71 billion in government debt, much like we've seen like the municipality of Detroit do on a smaller scale, although it was still big. You say it's time for some tough love on Puerto Rico, that Puerto Rico needs to take its lumps and deal with it. Do you advocate letting that debt default, some sort of like Chapter 9 bankruptcy?
No, I don't think we should let the debt default, but I think Puerto Rico should renegotiate their debt restructure their debt, whatever terminology you want to use, so that they can pay their creditors. You know, something like this happened in Arkansas around the Great Depression era. I actually covered that in the op-ed that I did for the Washington Post, but Arkansas didn't default. They defaulted on their payments, but they restructured. They ended up paying off their creditors. That happened in 1933, and it was 1949 before they issued any more bonds. So we've got an example there on how you do this. It wasn't easy, but you got to take responsibility for your previous actions, and the federal government's in no position to go in and bail out Puerto Rico. If we did it, we would just be bailing them out with more debt here.
So you don't
also pointed out in that I pointed out in the op-ed that if you look at the per capita debt in Puerto Rico, it's about $32,000 per person. If you look at the per capita debt in the United States, it's about $59,000 per person. So we're in no position to be bailing anybody out. But we do have a constitutional requirement, because they are a territory, they're a property of the United States government, directly reportable to Congress. So it's Congress's duty to put some oversight in place and make sure that they're taking care of business, because the government of Puerto Rico has kind of shunned their responsibilities.
So you don't want to see a bankruptcy per se, or a debt default like we saw in the city of Detroit. You want to see them restructure that debt somehow. Give me a specific or two as to how they would go about doing that in a way that would be satisfactory to you.
Yeah, and you mentioned $71 billion in debt. They've got another 30 or 40 billion, I think it's around 40 billion or 45 in unfunded pensions. So you get to a number closer to 115 billion of their total debt. So it's just like a business or anybody else would do. You sit down with your creditors and you work something out, and you come up with a new payment plan, and you commit to that payment plan. That's not any kind of a bailout. It's just Puerto Rico taking responsibility and doing what they need to do. But if you also see Puerto Rico as kind of an illustration of how a big progressive government doesn't work. It's they got a lot of government employees there. They've got a lot of government-owned businesses like the utilities. They pay 6 times more for electricity there than we do here on the mainland. And we've got to do some things that will create some pro-jobs, pro-growth economy down there, so that they can fend for themselves.
Let's shift gears completely. A bill has popped out of a committee that is headed for the House floor. It would require women to register for the Selective Service Military Draft. This is part of women now being eligible for combat pay. There's some legal precedent here that's at work with this push. What's your position on women signing up for the draft like men do at the age of 18?
You know, this is something that's just happened. I haven't actually seen the language in the bill. I'm aware that it passed out of committee on the National Defense Act. It's something I'm really opposed to, but again, I've got to look at the exact language on it. I've got a 17-year-old daughter, and the last thing I want to do is require her or any other young lady to sign up for the draft. But it's something I got to take a look at. I know the whole bill did pass out of committee with the amendment on it. And realistically, Roby, if you look, we've had a volunteer army for the past 40 years. I'm not sure how pertinent the draft even is anymore.
Let's move to another subject. Let's get down into the 4th Congressional District here. You're part of you're co-chair actually of the Bipartisan Working Forest Caucus, which just formed recently. Your district just got some pretty good economic news that could potentially help the timber industry in South Arkansas with the $1 to $1.3 billion Chinese-based Sun Paper Company locating a paper mill down there. 250 jobs. I haven't seen you put out a statement or offer a comment on this yet. Is this good news, or do you have some concerns?
Yeah, we put a statement out on it, but yeah, it's good news. We've got, especially in the 4th District, timber is a huge part of the landscape. It's a huge part of the economy. I believe we're about 86% forested in the 4th District. You know, we've lost a paper mill at Camden. If you talk to Dr. Pelkey down at UAM, the state's forest economist, he'll tell you that we've got 18 to 19 million tons a year of excess growth.
Right.
That's new fiber that's on the ground. that wasn't there last year, and that's including everything that gets cut off. So you look at one of these big paper mills that, they may use 2 million tons a year. We've literally got the resource to do 5 or 6 of these projects. So I think it's good for our economy. It'll be a way to not only create direct jobs there at the mill, but it'll be good for maintaining healthy forest, and it'll be good to affect that whole community down there in Clark County.
All right.
And the surrounding counties.
All right, Congressman Bruce Westerman, I got to wrap it up with you there. As always, we appreciate you being with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roby. Have a good day.
After this break, that big $1.3 billion Chinese paper plant isn't the only jobs announcement this week. There were 2 others, plus more on the horizon. AEDC Director Mike Preston joins us to talk business when we come back.